Greetings again everyone, and today I have what should be a classy little manual focus full frame lens for Sony E-mount, the Zeiss Loxia 35mm f2. It might be small, but it's certainly pricey, costing $1,300 or about £900 in the UK for a 35mm lens with an only moderately wide maximum aperture of f2. This thing had better be pretty spectacular to stand any chance of offering good value for money. I was especially interested to test it because 35mm is such a ubiquitous focal length on a full frame camera, very popular, one of my favourites. In fact, I think there might be more 35mm lenses available on Sony E-mount than 50mm. That moderately wide angle field of view is just so useful. Well, let's start by looking at build quality. The lens is pretty small, but feels lovely and solid and a little weighty at 340 grams. Its body is made of metal throughout, including its lens mount, which also sports the biggest weather sealing gasket I've seen in my life, in that distinctive Zeiss blue colour. Towards the rear is the manual aperture control ring, which clicks very nicely every third of an f-stop. It's not electronically coupled to your camera, it works mechanically, but your camera will be able to tell what the aperture is. That information is relayed back to it by the lens. Then comes a metallic focus ring, which turns beautifully smoothly with just enough precision to make manual focusing easy enough. Your camera is able to tell you when you're turning the focus ring and will zoom into your subject when you do to help you nail your focus down, which is handy. A problem I had with the focus ring though was that it turned a little too loosely. It was very easy for me to accidentally change focus when shooting in a field, which could be pretty annoying. As you can see here, the lens clearly suffers from focus breathing, zooming in as you focus more closely. The lens has a small 52mm filter thread size and comes with a very nice quality metallic hood. It doesn't have image stabilization. Overall, we enjoy nice build quality here for a manual focus lens. The criticisms I'd give are that it can be easy to accidentally change focus, and also that it can be a little tricky to get the lens on and off your camera, as there isn't much to grip onto around the focus and aperture rings. Now onto image quality. I'll start by testing this lens on a full frame camera, my 42MP Sony a7R II. At f2, image quality in the middle is only good. On strongly contrasting edges we see a little ghosting, which puts a damper on the sharpness. Image quality in the corners is very disappointing, looking really soft. This lens was focused carefully and properly, I do assure you. Stop down to f2.8 and we get a lot more contrast in the corners and the sharpness improves, although it obviously still is quite poor. Back in the middle though, the image has become excellent. Stop down to f4 to see razor sharpness in the middle, and the corners have become decently sharp now. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 for further small improvements, which lead to us seeing excellent sharpness from corner to corner, although a touch of colour fringing is visible here. If you stop down as far as f16 or f22, then softness emerges from the effect of diffraction. So it's a pretty disappointing performance for such a very expensive Zeiss lens here, especially considering that corner sharpness is generally considered to be far more important on a wide-angle lens. The image quality at wider apertures just isn't competitive. Now let's see how it performs on an aps-c camera, my little 24MP Sony a5100. In the middle of the image at f2, again, we see some slight softness, although the image quality isn't too bad. Again, the image quality in the corner is surprisingly poor. f2.8 looks just as bad in the corners, but very sharp in the middle. At f4 we see perfection in the middle, and an improvement in the corners. At f5.6 and f8, the corners finally look very good. Again, stop down to f16 or f22 for a lot of softness to begin to creep in. So, unfortunately, switching over to an aps-c camera doesn't seem to help this struggling lens at its widest apertures. Well, let's move on and look at distortion and vignetting on a full frame camera. These pictures were taken with in-camera corrections turned off. Distortion is pretty much absent here, which is good news. Normally, Zeiss lenses have problems with vignetting, but even at f2, vignetting is only moderate on this lens. Stop down to f2.8 and f4, and those corners brighten up quite nicely here. Still, you should turn vignetting correction on in your camera anyway. Now, let's see about close-up image quality. It can focus down to about 30 centimeters. The close-up image quality is very soft and ghostly at f2. However, at f2.8, contrast is much improved, and at f4, close-up pictures look nice and sharp. Now, let's take a look at how this lens works against bright lights. Not a great performance here either, albeit not disastrous. We do see some clear flaring and a disturbing bright glare when you're at a particular angle from a bright light, so it would be worth keeping your lens hood on here. While we're working in the dark, let's move on and look at Coma Smearing. At the brightest aperture of f2, bright points of light in the corners of your image show some absolutely appalling coma smearing here, some of the worst I've ever seen on a 35mm lens, and that's not to mention the flaring problem that sweeps its way into the edges too. Stop down to f2.8 though, and something interesting happens. The coma virtually disappears to be replaced by an impressive sunstar. Stop down to f4 or further, and those sunstars become ever more prominent and defined. If we zoom out a bit here, you can see them stretching across the image with their 8 points bursting out like equidistant octopus tentacles. This lens's optical performance is pretty unpredictable. Now, let's see about the quality of its bokeh. Generally speaking, it's lovely and smooth actually in almost all situations, although particularly tricky backgrounds in the middle distance can get a little messy, as you can see here. And finally, longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f2, well, the close-up image quality is pretty poor at f2, but nonetheless you can see some colour fringing on bokeh highlights here. Things look much better at f2.8, and at f4, any colour fringing is gone. Well then, overall, you know you're in trouble when the only impressive thing about a 35mm f2 manual focus lens that costs $1,300 is its sunstars. I just have to say that I feel sorry for anyone who's paid over $1,000 for this thing. Sell it immediately, because you were cheated. Its optics are disappointingly mediocre, and I have no problem in wholeheartedly not recommending it, considering its overinflated price.